Hello, everyone. It's that time of the week again, coming to you live from the quarantine. This is super interesting lectures on mildly boring topics with Ruth Levi, or maybe it's the other way around. Mildly boring lectures on super interesting topics. We'll let you decide. So last week we talked about pragmatic schemas and practs. So basically how our understanding of such things as hospitality or greetings play out practically in our everyday interactions with people, how these things are influenced by our cultural conceptualizations. And I gave you some homework, which hopefully helped to put these things in perspective, make them a little bit more real for you. So today we're going to talk about how cultural linguistics, or an understanding of cultural linguistics, can help us understand our cultural conceptualization of different emotions. Okay, so from the perspective of cultural linguistics, emotions have a physical dimension as well as a conceptual one, which can be seen in the following diagram. So here, the innermost circle and the outermost circle represent the physical experience and also outward expression of emotion. And then what we have in between in these circles are the conceptualizations which influence, which sort of serve as a mediator between the inner experience of emotion and the outward expression of it. Okay, so different languages may encode the same emotions differently. And by encoding, we just mean basically a physical expression of it, whether through a facial expression or a hand gesture. All of these things are encoding. So different cultures, besides just using different words, they also have different ways of physically showing what an emotion means. And different languages may associate different metaphors with the same emotion. So in one culture, they may think of sadness as sort of nesting like a bird in your heart, and in another culture they may think of it as a tiger attacking your innermost parts. So different languages have these different conceptual metaphors related to emotions, and this influences how the people of that culture think about that particular emotion. So speakers across different speech communities may draw on culture-specific schemas and foster different values or attitudes towards similar emotional categories. So the cultures that we live in influence how we think about things like joy or grief or depression, whether we see those things as ultimately positive or negative, as being virtuous or as being detrimental. So cultural attitudes toward emotion exert a profound influence on the dynamics of everyday discourse. Different cultures may vary in terms of the attitudes that they foster in their members toward the expression or encoding of emotions. Okay, so we are going to look at a specific example in Persian again, the Persian concept of calm. So Persian cultural conceptualizations related to the word calm. And calm does not have a specific translation in English, so it can be translated as a whole range of emotional states, and it overlaps with at least 5 different emotional concepts in English. So in English, it can be expressed as pain, sorrow, grief, sadness, and also worry. All right, so let's look at a couple of cultural metaphors where calm is used in expressions that envision the absence of a loved one as a physical pain, an actual physical pain. Okay, so the first one, pain of absence, you, O beloved, devastated me did. My beloved, your absence has devastated me. So in this case, calm was translated as pain, the pain of your absence. Okay, in the second example, sadness stricken to look you do anything happened. You look sad, what has happened? So in this case, instead of pain, calm was translated as sadness. In Iranian culture, it's considered a virtue to listen and share in another person's calm. And the person who does this is referred to as a calm eater. So the underlying cultural metaphor here is that calm is something edible. It's an edible entity. And obviously this is something new for us Westerners. We don't really envision our personal pain or depression as being something edible, that if someone else shares in our pain or in our depression, that they're actually consuming that emotion. But this is something which is very common in the Iranian culture, in their cultural conceptualization of this emotion, of the experience of this emotion. Okay, now we're going to look at some examples of calm used in some cross-domain cultural conceptualizations. Okay, so basically where calm is used together with another cultural metaphor in Persian. For example, calm, corner of heart mine, nest has done. In other words, calm has built a nest in the corner of my heart. So this particular expression uses the word del, which we talked about in one of our previous lectures. And it uses the cultural metaphor of del as the seat of emotions, plus the cultural metaphor of calm as a bird or animal that occupies a nest in del, or in the heart. Okay, So the emotional experience of calm has an important symbolic place in the religious and everyday life of many Iranians. And sort of unloading your pain or your anger or your grief can be a sign of piety in Iranian culture, reflecting this concept of dysphoria that they have. So you're probably familiar with the word utopia and dystopia, and euphoria and dysphoria. Similar situation. Euphoria means supreme happiness, and dysphoria means sadness. So in Iranian culture, dysphoria is seen as almost a religious experience. So it's not really viewed as we view sadness or pain here in the West, where it's something that we need to hide or we need to get rid of. We need to go to therapy or counseling or take some medicine to get rid of it. Rather, it's sort of an enriching religious experience for them, something where one has the opportunity to connect with the community at large. So dysphoria is not just the lack of individual happiness or pleasure for them. It's a central emotion of religious ritual. In the meantime, our saxophone concert for the afternoon has started. If you can hear it in the background, my son has his saxophone lesson. So that might bring us some euphoria right now in the midst of the dysphoria. So this experience of dysphoria is one of the defining moments of maturity for the Iranians when they learn to become a part of the community at large, and they develop a more profound understanding of the social order. So it's a very important element in the development of their selfhood. So obviously calm is not viewed as an entirely negative emotion for them. And a typical image, so the schema that they would associate with calm, is that of a mother worrying about her children. Sorry, I just forgot to go further here. Yes. Okay. Yes, a mother worrying about her children. There we go. Okay. So calm is not something negative, but they have this image in their mind of a mother sort of hovering over her children, gathering them to her, protecting them, sort of helping them go through this difficult time and nurturing them, helping them grow on to adulthood, to the next step in maturity. Okay. All right, so intercultural misunderstandings where emotions are concerned may occur either because one language does not have a specific word for that particular emotion, or because an emotion is understood as negative in one culture and positive in the other. Okay, let's look at two examples from Hungarian and English. So the first one are the words szeretet and szerelem in Hungarian, which, as you know, can only be expressed with one word in English, love. And if we want to make a differentiation, then we have to add some kind of qualifying word, like romantic love or familial love, brotherly love, divine love. But we don't have our own separate word for those different kinds of love. And in ancient Greek, their language or their expression of these concepts was even richer, as they had 4 separate words to express these different kinds of love. So they had philia, which is where words like philosophy come from, right? The love of wisdom. And philia was a kind of friendship. So the affection, the love that we experience in friendships. Then there was eros, which was their romantic or sexual love or attraction. Then storge, that was familial love, so the love of parents for their children, or the love of siblings for one another. So just the natural affection that people feel for those that they spend a lot of time with, that they grow up with, and who take care of them. Okay. All right. Another example from English is the word incentive, which has a very positive connotation in English. So if you mention the word incentive to an English speaker, then they would think of very positive things. An incentive is something that prompts you or encourages you to do something in a good way, while in Hungarian it can be translated in a negative sense as well. So in Hungarian, incentive could be translated as ingerlő, but it doesn't have this kind of meaning at all in English. So incentive would never awaken any kind of negative feelings in an English speaker. Okay. All right. Then we have an example from Aboriginal English where a word that is normally emotionally neutral acquires an emotional and spiritual dimension, and that is the word rain. And this was one of the presentation topics which you could have chosen, and Regina has chosen it. She's done a presentation on it, so I don't want to go too much into it, but just very briefly. So rain in Aboriginal English for the Aborigines, rain is often used to conceptualize the emotions of the ancestors for them, the sadness or the anger of the ancestors. So the physical, natural phenomena of rain is a very emotional experience for them. They see it as an outpouring of the emotions of the ancestors, and in a way also a sort of a sympathy with their own emotions. So it's an expression of the ancestors' emotions, and it also reflects this connection between them and the ancestors. So a very emotional, very religious experience for them. Okay, and that is reflected in the following story told by an Aboriginal woman. She's talking about the Aboriginal experience of death. So when the community is mourning someone who has died. And she says, when it's death or funeral times, then this cloud comes, and it's the rain. It's called the Midgel. It's a sad rain. It's crying rain. The old falla's crying for, not crying for the fallow who's gone because they're with them. They're crying for the fallas that are there. They're crying sad for watching all the people, the mob, crying, you know. And it's a soft rain, a different rain. Okay? So basically she says that when someone among them dies, the ancestors send a rain to cry with them, to grieve with them, to mourn with them. But they're not crying for the person who died. Rather, they are crying for the people who are left behind. So the ancestors are very compassionate, very sympathetic, and this is expressed through the natural phenomenon of rain. So the rain is a very emotional experience for them. Okay, so their cultural metaphor, the metaphor evoking all of these emotions for them, is that of rain as the tears of the ancestor spirits. And this is obviously a cultural metaphor which none of us share. Most people in the West do not share this. Maybe some of the Native American tribes have similar concepts, but certainly nobody from a modern European civilization has this cultural metaphor, this cultural conceptualization, and rain does not evoke such emotions for any of us. Okay, so as I mentioned, rain for them is associated with the emotions of the ancestors, either sadness or anger. And the ancestors send an angry rain, so they cry angry tears when someone has done something wrong. It could be the result of someone savage earning the wrath of the ancestor spirits. So obviously rain for them is not just a neutral experience of natural phenomenon, but it has a lot of emotional, a lot of spiritual implications for them. Okay, the last example that we're going to look at is conceptualizations related to the word sorry in Aboriginal English. And as we'll see, the word sorry carries a lot of nuances in Aboriginal English, which are absent from standard everyday English. So the word sorry in Aboriginal English has another meaning as well, and they have an expression of being in sorry. So for them, being in sorry is basically the same as being in mourning for somebody or for a tragic event. So you can feel sorry for somebody, and you can also be in sorry. Okay, so another Aboriginal woman said, sometimes Cardia, non-Aboriginal people, they feel sorry for Yapa, for Aboriginals, when they're in sorry. And that means that they share their sorrows with us. And that's really good. Okay? So interestingly, again, here we have this concept of how sorrow or pain helps to bring communities together. So when we feel compassion for others, when we can share their pain with them, then that's a good thing. Then pain, sorrow, depression can serve a good purpose. So the same kind of thing that we were seeing with calm in Iranian too. All right, so finally, to conclude, an example of how cultural misunderstandings related to emotions can have really tragic and profound practical effects in society. So sadly, at the beginning and up to the middle of the 20th century in Australia, the government had a policy of taking Aboriginal children away from their parents and placing them in white Australian families, or putting them in boarding schools where they would learn, where they would get a European education. And these children are called the stolen generations. So in the 1990s, several groups stood up and demanded that the Australian government say sorry to the Aboriginal people for this policy, for what happened to the stolen generations. But in the 1990s, the Prime Minister refused to say sorry, and his reason was that it was not his generation who had been responsible for this policy. So he said he was not personally involved, he was not personally guilty, nor was anyone who was still alive. So he felt that for him to apologize was inappropriate. But this obviously demonstrated a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, where the Aboriginal understanding of the concept of sorry was concerned. Because really what was meant by a demand for a sorry was more an expression of empathy than a statement of guilt. So what was really needed, or what they were really asking for, was a statement or gesture of compassion, which would allow the victims of a bad policy to have their pain and suffering acknowledged somehow. So basically all they wanted is for the government to say, look, we know that you have been hurting a lot, your people have been hurting a lot because of what was done to you, and we share in that pain. We feel bad for you in your sorry. So we know that you are in sorry for that, and we feel sorry for you. So finally, in 2008, the new Prime Minister of Australia did say that he was sorry for what had happened to the stolen generations of Aboriginal children. Okay. All right. So another tragic misunderstanding that occurred in relation to the stolen generations, also as a result of this misunderstanding surrounding the concept of sorry or mourning. So parents, Aboriginal parents, often dealt with their loss by trying to forget or by burying memories deep in their hearts, or in traditional cultural environments by imposing a sorry silence, usually reserved for the dead. So basically, when their child was taken from them, they went into mourning, just as if the child had died. But sometimes when this silence was observed from the outside, from an ethic perspective, as we talked about earlier, so from a perspective outside of that culture, this attracted the mistaken assumption that the children were not important to their families, or that the parents were somehow indifferent to the loss of their children. So a failure to recognize that silence in Aboriginal culture is a way of dwelling in sorry, of being in mourning, of dealing with one's grief. Okay, so I hope this has given you a better idea of how important it is to understand the cultural conceptualizations behind our experience of emotions and other cultures' experience of emotions. And I will see you next week for our next installment of very interesting lectures about super fascinating topics. All right, everyone, stay well. Bye-bye.